Good morning. You're listening to Retake Our Democracy, a weekly radio show that airs at 8:30 a.m. every Saturday morning on KSFR 101.1 FM, your Santa Fe public radio station. And I'm Paul Gibson, the host of Retake Our Democracy. Today, I'll be talking with Rachel Feldman. She's the chair of the Civil Rights and Criminal Justice Reform Committee of Indivisible SOS Santa Fe. We'll be speaking about the development of new criminal justice reform legislation that Rachel has been involved in developing. We'll get to Rachel in just a minute, but first, a few short announcements. Last week, I spoke with Michael Roca, UNM political science professor who has done extensive research on the influence of money, particularly industry-generated PAC money, on congressional politics and politicians' positions on the issues. He also published a major policy report on cronyism and economic development in the state of New Mexico. Finally, Michael is the co-author of a report on the need to modernize the legislature by extending sessions, paying legislators a salary, and paying for legislators to have dedicated staff. We had a lot to talk about. I want to remind you that if you're listening to this show while driving around town and miss any of this show or want to catch up on any of our prior shows, all of them are available at retakeourdemocracy.org. And just click on Retake on the Radio, and that's on the right lower side of the homepage. And all of our radio shows are listed in chronological order there. So you can binge watch Retake on the Radio and cancel your Apple TV subscription. Before we get started, I also want to acknowledge that we are conducting this show on stolen Tewa land. And we want to thank our Tewa neighbors for being such good stewards of the land. We could learn a good deal from them, and we better learn it fast. Okay, let's meet Rachel. Welcome to the show, Rachel.
Thank you. Good to be here.
I'd like to let our guests introduce themselves. So please introduce yourself and tell our listeners how you became involved in advocacy with Indivisible Santa Fe SOS, and then became involved in crafting legislation to strengthen law enforcement in our state.
I'll try to keep that short. I came to New Mexico from the Washington, D.C. metro area about 7 years ago. I was born into activist family and have been an activist my whole life around poverty and healthcare issues. When I moved here, I started to learn about New Mexico politics, the legislature, the problems. And I got interested in first local law enforcement and immigration issues. I got to know the sheriff in Santa Fe County and have worked with him for quite some time and learned a lot about what some of the issues are that are faced in New Mexico in particular. Indivisible SOS is a group of over 100 women activists. We are a branch of the National Indivisible organization. The SOS stands for Speaking Out Sanely. And I found this organization to be a very interesting group of women who really want to make a difference on many different levels, national, state, and local. So the sheriff got me interested in the training issues. I saw what he was able to do here in Santa Fe, and I thought, why can't we do this at the state level? And that started me on an odyssey of talking to people in the state, other law enforcement experts, and legislators.
So Roxanne and I spent a good deal of time with Attorney General-elect Raul Torres and Mendoza, Sheriff Mendoza, and we're very impressed with their plans for training. I'm imagining that what you have in mind is relatively similar. So what are the current issues and problems with the New Mexico criminal justice system that you hope to address with this legislation? And what is the primary cause of law enforcement shortcomings in our state?
Those are really, really big questions. But fundamentally, New Mexico is sort of in the middle of states in terms of its ability to deliver training to its law enforcement profession. There's more than a dozen states that have no training at all, no requirements at the state level. We do have requirements, but we have a law enforcement system of 190 some police agencies that are all independent of each other, and there's very little state policy. So there's basic training to be certified as a law enforcement officer, but there's very little consistency or continuity after that graduation when people go to work in different agencies. So you have no consistency across the state. And as things progress and get more complicated, there's more and more need for police agencies to work together, to coordinate, and they don't have the same training expectations or policies. So there's a lot of chaos that ensues due to that situation. Secondly, the system that exists, or the lack of a system, is old, has been underfunded, and has not been updated for more than 20 years. So training, which really needs to change on a constant basis, has not been updated except minimally to comply with changes in state law. So we have a process that's out of date, pieces of a system that don't work together, no accountability, very little data. And when you talk to legislators, none of them know how it works.
Well, that sounds like a lot of things to fix, but
Yeah.
you can't just throw training at officers if you don't have a system to support that, a supervisory system and an evaluation system and so forth. And I'm guessing that's part of the legislation as well.
Yeah, the legislation looked, and we did an analysis. We did, our group did research, national research on what other states are doing. We looked at what curriculum is being developed by national organizations, what approaches are being taken to modernize policing in different jurisdictions. We talked with some people who run national programs, and we came back to meet with the Department of Public Safety, which runs the Law Enforcement Academy, and the Law Enforcement Academy Board, which is an appointed independent agency in New Mexico that oversees currently both misconduct investigations as well as what the Law Enforcement Academy is supposed to do. It has been chaired by the Attorney General, and it has had many years of a backlog, a lack of support, lack of staff, and has been relatively unable to do policy making. So what we are doing is looking at all the gaps in the existing legislation and policy and rulemaking, and trying to form a system that fills those gaps, takes the more current thinking in national circles about modernizing policing, and develops a system that can produce outcomes. And those outcomes should be measured, and the system should be held accountable. And so we have taken the ideas of legislators in their legislating that was done earlier this year in the 2022 session, and they created oversight bodies which were not funded and were not defined. We've filled in the definitions, we've identified the funding, and we have identified processes and criteria that would be used by the legislature to assess the performance of an effective training and oversight system. It is not just training of basic, the basic training to become a police officer. It's training from basic all the way through higher, advanced, and supervisory levels, professional development, plans to provide corrective action for people who need it, and a whole score of approaches that are more modern, not just in policing, but in employment and in other industries as well, to create and strengthen a profession so that the law enforcement personnel believe and feel that they are part of a profession and can take pride in that profession. That should help with attracting new employees and retaining the good ones. And this includes a very tough oversight process whereby bad actors are disciplined or eliminated from policing.
That's interesting. So a question that I had about this, the nature of some of the training is related to defund the police. The movement was not really about completely defunding police departments, at least in most manifestations, but rather to redirect some of police enforcement funding to behavioral health interventions conducted by either mental health counselors or police who are specially trained to conduct nonviolent responses to domestic disputes and mental health crises. Does the legislature incorporate training that relates to this?
Sure. We don't use the defund the police terminology at
Good
all.
move.
It's just we're trying to work with a diverse bunch of interests and avoid politically laden, baggage laden language and talk in a very direct and concrete way. We have performance criteria, one of which is to ensure that police and 911 dispatchers who are also covered by this legislation, their training is also included in this, that they work in a very stressful field and need services themselves. So part of our concern is that there be respect for the mental health and behavioral health needs of the workforce itself. There is about 40 hours of training in the old curriculum on mental health issues. It needs to be updated, expanded, modernized. There are a variety of ways to do that. Part of what happens in this legislation is it begins with an assessment of what exists, what is needed, and what is out there to build on nationally as resources that could be brought into New Mexico to bring New Mexico up to speed. So yes, there are issues on the table that aren't in the legislation yet about innovations that exist in some places like alternative response teams, but they're not everywhere and they can't be everywhere right now. There aren't the resources for it. But there needs to be an understanding generated in the training programs of how you ask for help, how you evaluate and assess when there are mental health and substance abuse issues involved in a scene, starting with the 911 dispatchers and their relationship to the new 988 national mental health emergency line. So there are a variety of newer, more modern, more scientifically based approaches that need to be infused into the training, not just in a little course on it, but throughout the entire training cycle. And part of our hope is that in the assessment, the training program will change from a list of courses and units and become a more integrated set of efforts where with the new simulation technology that's available for officer training, one can analyze a lot of the subject matters, including the mental health, substance abuse, behavioral health, potential assessments, interventions, and such in the thinking on their feet that basic law enforcement officers need to do.
This is fascinating. I'm really looking forward to some of our discussion that's going to come up later. But who in terms of social groups is most impacted by the current problems with the law enforcement in our state?
Well, I think we're not that different from the rest of the country. People of color are disproportionately impacted. The training that's available on implicit bias is very poor, very limited, not measured, not known to be effective here or any place else, except there's some work being done on that in a few places. The effect on poor people, whether they're people of color or not, homeless people, people with mental health and substance abuse problems are all much more likely to come into contact with law enforcement. And law enforcement without better training is much less capable of understanding their behavior and responding to their needs than they are to people who look like them.
Okay, well, we're going to have to take a break right here to remind our listeners that they're listening to KSFR 101.1 FM Santa Fe, the Santa Fe's public radio station. And KSFR offers really timely news programming and a wide range of cultural and arts and music programming. And in a time of misinformation on the social media and in the mainstream media, being able to get Democracy Now!, the BBC, Economic Update from Richard Wolff, which comes on at 8 o'clock in the morning on Saturday, just before this program. Um, and um, and just it's just a tremendous station and a source of straight up news. So if you believe in public radio, after you finish listening to this program, go to ksfr.org, click on the donate button, and give them 10, 20, 50 bucks and view it as your ticket for admission to some very important programming. And on behalf of KSFR, I want to thank you for your donation. Well, we're back with Rachel Feldman, the chair of the Civil Rights and Criminal Justice Reform Committee of Indivisible SOS Santa Fe. Is it Indivisible Santa Fe SOS or SOS Indivisible Santa Fe?
Indivisible SOS Santa Fe.
Okay, so I did it right. Oh my.
Yeah, you did.
So we've covered the fact that this will definitely improve training in mental health issues for officers. How did you go about developing, aside from looking at evidence-based practice online and so forth, and interviewing people from other states, how did you get the input and engagement of law enforcement?
Well, it started with a long-term relationship with Sheriff Mendoza, and he introduced us to the leadership at the Department of Public Safety, and we started meeting with the Deputy Secretary, who's the interim director of the Law Enforcement Academy, and the Secretary of the Department of Public Safety, and a lot of their people. And we've been interviewing the people who run the satellite training facilities and a number of other law enforcement leaders around the state to get their ideas and input. In September, we convened a statewide meeting of 70 or 80 law enforcement leaders from around the state, including people involved with public safety telecommunications, which is the 911 dispatchers, the satellite academies, and quite a few police chiefs and sheriffs and other leadership personnel. A good chunk of the leadership of the state police participated, and we had people from all over the state. We spent a half a day in a listening session with a very structured agenda. And we talked, we listened, and they talked to each other. And it turns out they don't have a lot of opportunities to talk to each other. So they found this very, very exciting. And they asked at the end, they asked if they could do it again, if we could continue the dialogue. We took detailed notes from that. We had follow-up conversations with some of the people who had their ideas they wanted to talk more about, and that all of that information has been used to develop the bill that we have. It's in a discussion draft. It still has a number of changes and modifications to go through. We are this Friday, convening a second meeting of the same people. Zoom, a hybrid meeting at the Law Enforcement Academy with hopefully about the same number of people, possibly some new people. And we will be going through the legislation and asking them for their feedback. It's been sent to them. We've gotten some feedback from them already. So this is a bottoms up process. We're really looking at the more progressive thinkers, the more articulate thinkers in law enforcement across the state. We're not doing this as a political or partisan effort. We're really listening, and what we've done is put together what we think is a workable system that will lead us in the direction that most of us want to go. And it turns out most of us share a lot of the same goals and objectives when you don't talk about it in political terms. It's a lot of agreement.
Well, it sounds like you have enthusiastic support from law enforcement across the state. And what you've talked with the AG office, and I know you're planning to check in with AG-elect Raul Torres, correct?
Sure.
He really likes Mendoza's thinking, so I think you're going to have a receptive audience there.
I expect that he will be very interested and supportive of this. AG Balderas was very excited about it, and very excited about the idea that a bunch of citizens would initiate policy making to transform law enforcement.
I hope that our listeners are really listening to this, because this is something Retake wants to move more into. We're involved in supporting efforts like this, but take the lead, and it just shows you that, if you go in and do the work, and the legislators they're not paid, they don't have paid staff, they don't have time to do the research online of what is the evidence-based practice and what are the outcomes other states are achieving. And so you've got a group of volunteers like Rachel here. You can actually have a really significant impact. How do you feel you've been received by legislators in this work?
We're currently, I can't speak right now to who's going to sponsor this because it's being negotiated right now, but we are, it's a Senate bill. We have a number of senators who are very supportive and excited about it. There's some politics and who takes the lead and does what, but that should be sorted out in about a week or so. We've had support from a number of House members and expect that once this is more public, it will be well supported. We did make presentations to the Interim Courts Corrections and Justice Committee that meets between legislative sessions. So we have released the bill and had a presentation, discussion, question and answer with that group, and we're very well received. We've had, I think there's only been one questionable, potentially negative set of comments, and that's from a retired police officer who will go unnamed in the House of Representatives. But we've had lots of excitement. Most people don't understand anything about how this works, and they're shocked to find out how much underfunding there's been and what some of the issues are, and that they can be fixed. They're excited
it's
to hear
interesting
it
because I've had this same conversation with people who are involved in water policy, involved in gas and oil regulation, that the state offices are horribly underfunded, that they have no resources to do what they're supposed to be doing. And yet we're sitting here with the largest surplus in New Mexico history. Is there a price tag for your bill, Rachel?
Yep, there is. I can't tell you exactly what it is because there's a couple versions. The Department of Public Safety's budget has been submitted and reviewed and includes staffing that we all discussed with them for the new, there's a training and a standards and training council that will oversee the modernization and policy related to training. And there's a certification board that will oversee misconduct and denials of certification. So there are now two separate oversight bodies, and there is included staffing and funding for that, including staffing for an information system that the state already has, but has been unable to populate because of lack of staff and lack of teeth in reporting requirements. And we have in the legislation put teeth in the reporting requirements. So we expect to see much more complete reporting, which will allow us to monitor compliance and describe what's happening across the state and in any jurisdiction. So the curriculum modernization has a price tag of about 2.25 million for the law enforcement officers and about $750,000 for the dispatchers, 911 dispatchers, and that would be done every 5 years, a cycle of every 5 years, and the staff would be recurring permanent staff. The status of that right now is that the DPS budget for those functions that are in our bill have survived the cuts, whereas everything else has been cut. But there's also redundant appropriations requests in our legislation. So in the process of going through the legislature, we will have to refine and coordinate between the DPS appropriations and the funding requested in our legislation. But the intent is to fully fund the staffing and the money for consultants to do the assessment of policing and dispatching and build a curriculum, which will take a couple of years to do.
Right. Well, have you had conversations with either the Senate Finance Chair, George Munoz, or the House Appropriations Chair Patty Lundstrom.
Not yet, but there are legislators working on that on our behalf,
Okay.
trying to get them into the loop, and we will be talking to them.
So can you tell our listeners where they might be able to get more information about this? Because this is exciting. It's great to see a systemic approach.
Yeah,
Really is.
it's, we don't have a formal outlet of information at the moment. The bill will be filed in, as soon as the filing opens, right after the first of the year, I believe January 3rd. So on nmlegis.gov, you will be able to get the bill and follow it. People can contact me if they want information. That's RL Feldman, Feldman, 1949 @gmail.com. There will be information on the Indivisible SOS website as well. Probably in about a week or 10 days, we will have information on that website as to how to take action and help. We're just
we will
really
have
getting
it up-
going.
I'm sorry, we will have it on the retakeourdemocracy.org because we will certainly be supporting this legislation.
Great.
I want to thank Rachel Feldman, the chair of the Santa Fe SOS Criminal Justice Reform Committee, and who has been working hard with the legislature to get this reform package built and ready for prime time next sessions in 2023. I want to thank you again, Rachel, for being with us. And I want to remind our listeners that we'll be back next week. I'm going to be interviewing Charles Goodmacher, who is going to be talking to us about the intersection of public health and climate change. And he's written a good deal about it. And there's some legislation that's coming forward in 2023 that he'll share with us. So until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and most of all, stay active. It's the only way we fix this mess. Thank you very much, Rachel. Bye-bye, folks. See you next week. Happy holidays.